They told me it was just a bit of birthday fun. That's what Danica said when she blindfolded me outside the cabin, her voice sugary and playful, the kind of tone that sounded like love but always had teeth underneath. Trust us, she laughed. You'll remember this forever. Well, she wasn't wrong. I remember the sound of the duct tape stretching off the roll, loud, sticky, deliberate. I remember Jules' voice, slurred from wine, giggling, ooh, rough night for birthday boy. I remember the cold bite of the tape against my wrists, the way the bark dug into my back when they shoved me up against the pine. I remember thinking, okay, maybe it's a little over the top, but they'll laugh, untie me in 10 minutes, hand me a beer, and I'll be the punchline. Except the laughter faded. The footsteps crunched away on the pine needles. The engine started. The music thumped as tires spun in gravel. And then, silence. At first, I thought it was part of the joke. Just another beat in their long-running sitcom of my life. I was always the good sport, right? The dependable one. The guy who never complained when Danica's father, Raymond, called me handyman husband at country club dinners. The one who smiled through brunches where her mother, Frances, asked if I was still doing that blue-collar hobby work. The one who nodded along while her friends talked over me, laughed about me. Never with me. I stayed. I showed up. I married the girl who wore rebellion like perfume and told me I grounded her. In truth, she wore me down instead. I was duct taped to a tree on my 34th birthday. Happy birthday, Micah. I waited for what felt like an hour. I twisted against the ropes. The tape cut into my skin as I squirmed. My cheek brushed rough bark. The blindfold was slipping, and just beneath it, the sun began to lower, throwing streaks of gold and shadow through the branches. My mouth was dry. I started to realize they weren't coming back. I tried calling out once, just once, still half hoping they'd pop out from the woods with sparklers and a camera. No one answered. No movement. Just the creak of trees and the low hum of dusk. That's when the panic set in. I fought the ropes harder, and something in me, something raw and furious, snapped. I twisted my wrist upward, grinding skin until the tape loosened just enough to slide halfway over my hand. I grunted, pulled harder, teeth clenched. The rope scraped my arms. My shirt tore at the shoulder. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't cinematic. It was primal. Desperate. It took 30 minutes to wriggle free. Maybe longer. Time didn't work normally in that place. I pulled off the blindfold and blinked hard into the light. The woods stretched around me in every direction. Thick trees, uneven ground, no trail markers. My watch was gone. My phone, wallet, gone. They'd taken it all, even my jacket. I laughed. A short, bitter sound. Maybe they thought I'd stumble back into town and be grateful. Maybe they thought humiliating me in the middle of nowhere would make them feel big. But the thing is, when you're left alone like that, something shifts inside you. Something changes. I walked. No map, no plan. Just instinct. I followed the slope of the land, hoping it would lead me to water or a road. My legs ached. The sun dipped. My breath turned visible. I walked until the trees got too thick and I had to sit down. That's when the real fear crept in. What if I got hurt? What if a bear showed up? What if this was how I died, forgotten, tied to a tree like a joke that went too far? But another voice in my head answered back. Not the scared one. The one I'd silenced for years. The voice that said, they don't deserve your name, your face, your grief. So I stood back up. Hours passed. I don't remember all of it. Just flashes, branches snapping underfoot, my breath fogging up in the chill, my fingers numb and dirty. I found a stream and followed it. Eventually, the faint outline of something man-made emerged through the trees, an old ranger outpost, half bored, half forgotten. I collapsed near the porch. That's where he found me. I woke to a flashlight in my face and a gruff voice barking, "Hey, hey, you alive?" I nodded, barely. He helped me up. Thick beard, worn flannel, old military boots. "What the hell happened to you?" he asked. I didn't answer. He brought me inside. Heated up a can of beans. Gave me a wool blanket and didn't push. I sat by the stove, trembling. When he asked for my name, I lied. "Jonah," I said. That was the first time I said it out loud. It felt strange. Hollow, but also free. "All right, Jonah," the man said. "I'm Marlin. You're lucky I check this place every couple weeks. Another day, you might have been coyote food." I nodded. He poured me coffee. Told me I could stay a while. Said no one would come looking not way out here. I believed him. That night, while he slept in the back room, I stared at the wood panels of the cabin. Thought about the people I left behind. Thought about the way they laughed as they drove off. Thought about what kind of man lets himself be the joke for that long. And then I stopped thinking about Micah Ward altogether. Because he didn't matter anymore. I didn't speak much the next few days. I didn't have to. Arlen wasn't the kind of man who needed stories to make you real. He watched people, not with suspicion, but with a calm patience that made it feel like time slowed around him. He didn't ask too many questions either. Just enough to make sure I wasn't a threat. Or a ghost. I slept on a cot in the corner of the ranger outpost. A single blanket. A space heater that hummed like a distant generator. I kept having the same dream. Headlights fading into trees. Laughter. Duct tape. My own name echoing like a stranger's. Every time I woke up, I didn't feel scared. Just cold. Like my own skin didn't quite fit anymore. On the fourth morning, I tried to chop firewood. My hands were still raw from the ropes, but I needed to feel useful. I needed to move. You ever used an axe before? Arlen asked, stepping out of the doorway, arms crossed. I gripped the handle awkwardly. Not since summer camp. Then don't die in front of me, he muttered and tossed me a pair of gloves. He showed me how to brace the log, how to use the weight of the axe instead of trying to muscle through it. I wasn't good at it, but I got better by the hour. That evening, when we sat in silence over reheated chili, Arlen finally said, "You're running from something." I looked up but didn't say a word. He nodded slowly. That's all right. Everybody out here's run from something at some point. Me? I ran from war. This cabin, this whole mountain, it's my penance and my peace. I stirred my food. Do you ever go back? He smirked. Ain't no back for me. Only forward. I envied that. The way he said it so casually. Like it was that easy. But I wasn't ready to tell him the truth. Not yet. I didn't even want to say the name aloud, Danica. It tasted like ash in my mouth now. Like saying it might pull me back into being that same quiet shadow of a man. The man they left in the woods like garbage after a birthday dinner. Instead, I stayed. I worked. Days became a rhythm. Firewood, cleanup, small repairs on the roof. Arlen taught me how to hunt rabbits. How to skin them. He let me borrow his books, survival guides, old military memoirs, even a few ancient business books from his brother who used to run a supply chain company in Detroit. You've got hands, he said once, nodding at me while I patched a hole in the cabin wall. But more than that, you've got eyes that look too far ahead. That's a good thing. You'll do more than survive. I didn't respond, but I felt something shift inside me, like a needle finding its way to true north. After 2 weeks, I started walking farther from the cabin, mapping out trails, using a broken compass Arlen had taught me to fix. I wasn't trying to get back to town. I was trying to get away from what used to be mine. I didn't want to be found. Not yet. Not like that. At night, I sat on the porch and stared at the stars, thinking about how close I'd come to dying out here. Thinking about how no one, not a single one of them, had checked on me before they drove off. I wondered what they were doing now. Probably sipping wine, staging some tearful, "we thought he'd be back" drama, maybe even calling the police to cover themselves. I imagined Frances dabbing her eyes while Raymond told the officers I was unstable. I could already hear Danica's voice trembling with guilt she didn't feel. He was quiet, but he's always been off. We thought he'd gone for a walk. We didn't mean. No, I wasn't going back to that. Micah Ward was dead. One night, near the end of the 3rd week, I finally asked Arlen a question that had been burning a hole in my gut. If you wanted to disappear, really disappear, how would you do it? He leaned back in his chair, took a long sip of instant coffee, and said nothing for a while. Then he scratched his beard and said, "You don't just disappear. You get replaced. The man you were? You bury him. Real deep. Then you start building the new one from scratch. But here's the trick. The old you has to stay dead. No contact. No slips. You breathe a new name. You wear a new face." I nodded slowly. "You ever done that?" He looked at me and smiled, slow and crooked. "Once." And that was all he said. From that day on, I started calling myself Jonah, only Jonah. Practiced it in the mirror. Carved it into the handle of the axe. It wasn't just a name. It was a border wall. Jonah Rourke was a man who had survived something violent, something humiliating, something unforgivable, and used it like flint. I shaved off my beard and grew a mustache. I started doing push-ups every morning. Went from 10 to 50. Then 100. I asked Arlen to teach me how to shoot. He pulled out a rusted .22 and said, "Lesson 1. Don't shoot your damn foot." I found an old laptop in the storage shed, barely working. Arlen helped me fix it up. I downloaded free design software, tutorials, basic HTML courses. Every night, after chores were done, I sat on the porch and taught myself. There was something beautiful about learning quietly, alone, without someone sighing or checking their phone or pretending to be impressed. I didn't need applause. I needed direction. One afternoon, Arlen handed me a brown envelope. Inside was a new state ID. Jonah Rourke, Oregon resident. Born 6 years later than I really was. Friend of mine at the vet's bureau owed me a favor, Arlen said. I didn't say thank you. I just gripped it like it was the first real thing I'd owned in years. Weeks turned to months. I didn't count the days anymore. Micah was gone. Jonah was learning to live. But deep down, I knew one thing hadn't disappeared with the duct tape and pine needles. The rage. The kind that doesn't explode, but waits. The kind that plans. And when the time came, they'd learn what it meant to tie a man to a tree and forget him. They filed a report 2 days after they left me out there. Claimed they hadn't seen me since the night of the prank. Told police it was supposed to be a joke. Said I got upset, untied myself, and wandered off into the woods alone. Danika's voice trembled on the call. He was fragile lately. We tried to get him to talk to someone. I think he just needed space. They called it concern. But really, it was cleanup. The story was airtight enough. Rich girl. Charming family. Husband with a vague past and no close connections. Inconveniently, no phone to defend himself. No footage. Just a rumor, a mistake, a tragic misunderstanding. They never told the full truth. That they tied me to a tree like some backwoods party game. That they left me there without food, without a way back, in a part of Oregon most tourists didn't dare to hike alone. That it was a joke until it wasn't. But by the time they realized I hadn't come back, the air had already shifted. A police cruiser showed up at the cabin. Danika cried on the porch. Francis wrung her hands. Raymond did most of the talking. We were drinking, he said. He took it the wrong way. Walked off down the ridge. They plastered my face on flyers. Missing. Last seen near Whispering Pines cabin. Brown hair. Blue eyes. 6 feet 1 inch. Answers to Micah Ward. They told the news I was troubled. Said I struggled with isolation, had gone through some personal things, and maybe needed help, but had never asked. Danika looked into the camera like she was auditioning for grief. If you're out there, baby, she said, just come home. We're so sorry. I didn't mean for things to go this way. Meanwhile, I watched from a broken recliner inside Arlen's cabin, the screen fuzzy but clear enough. He'd picked up an old TV from a flea market, rigged it with a busted antenna and battery pack. Figured you might want to see, he said. I sat there, quiet, as my wife's tears hit every major news station from Portland to Seattle. I didn't cry. Didn't even blink. She was good at pretending. She always had been. The worst part was how quickly the public picked a side. Some folks felt sorry for her. Poor wife, worried sick, left behind by a husband who couldn't handle life. Others raised eyebrows. Why'd it take her so long to report it? Why no GPS on his phone? Why did the friends all say slightly different versions of the story? The noise grew, then faded, like it always does. The world moved on. Eventually, the search was downgraded. No evidence of foul play. Just another case filed away in the lost and forgotten drawer. But I didn't forget. Every night I wrote it down. Not just what they did, but how they made me feel while doing it. Each insult. Each smirk. Each moment I swallowed down instead of speaking. All those years of being polite while they trampled me like a doormat in clean shoes. Danika's condescending laughter. Tori's whispers behind my back. Kyla's fake smiles. Jules' drunk jokes. Francis always calling me dear, like I was some orphan they'd picked up for the holidays. Raymond nodding at me like a barely trained dog. They tried to bury me, but I didn't stay dead. Arlen sat across from me one night, pipe in hand, blowing slow circles of smoke. So, he said, what now? I shrugged. They think I'm gone. He leaned back. You are. Mike is gone. You said so yourself. You died out there under that tree. Jonah walked out of the forest. Question is, what's Jonah going to do? The question haunted me. I could vanish for good, sure. Move states. Change my face. Work a quiet job. Build a life from scratch. Leave the past behind. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth. They'd made me into something I wasn't. Painted me as weak. Fragile. Forgettable. They didn't just discard me, they rewrote me. That's what got under my skin more than the duct tape burns or the bug bites or the cracked ribs from the fall I took climbing out of a ravine that night. It was the idea that they thought they could control the narrative, control who I was, even in my absence. I wasn't going to let that stand. But revenge, real revenge, isn't just slashing tires or keying cars or airing dirty laundry online. It's quieter. It's smarter. It's long, cold, surgical. It requires patience. Focus. First, I needed a clean break. I deleted every trace of Micah from memory, literally. I reached out to a contact Arlen had, a guy named Mako who used to help veterans get off the grid. He taught me how to build a new digital identity, how to encrypt my devices, how to pay for things in cash or crypto, how to stay invisible until I was ready to be seen. Then came the work. I'd always dabbled in design on the side, logos for friends, flyers for the local church back when I still believed in grace. Now, I poured myself into it. Arlen let me use his shed out back. I set up a desk, installed solar panels for power, rebuilt the laptop piece by piece. I started taking anonymous freelance gigs, logos, websites, marketing materials. I studied every night, branding theory, color psychology, UX design, coding basics. For the first time in years, I felt awake. And for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. Arlen didn't say much about the change, just watched. Occasionally offered advice, sometimes a warning. Don't build your whole life around hate, he said once. It'll burn you up. I nodded, pretending to understand. But I wasn't building around hate. I was building from it. There's a difference. Hate consumes. But fuel makes you move. Danika's last appearance on the news came about 2 months after I vanished. She wore a black blouse and held a photo of us together, her grinning, me mid-blink. She looked older already. Tired. Makeup couldn't hide it. I watched her lips move. I knew those lips. I knew how they twisted when she lied. He was the love of my life, she said. I turned the TV off. If I had any doubt before, it was gone now. They could play innocent to the world. But I'd be the ghost in their mirror, the shadow they couldn't shake. And one day, when they least expected it, they'd see my name again. But not the one they knew. Jonah Rourke. And they wouldn't even recognize me. Not until it was far, far too late. I started with nothing but a name and a camper that smelled like gasoline and damp wool. Arlen's cousin had an old tin can of a trailer sitting in his backyard, rusted at the hinges and leaning like it had one bad leg. He sold it to me for $700 and a promise not to die inside it. I scrubbed the mildew off the ceiling, patched the cracked skylight with a garbage bag, and wired in a solar panel rig I found on Craigslist. It was barely a home, but it was mine. And it was the place Jonah Rourke came to life. I didn't go into town much at first. Too many strangers, too many eyes. I kept to the mountain edge where the lumber yards and construction sites needed men who didn't ask for W-2s. I showed up early, worked until my hands split, then walked home in steel-toe boots with someone else's name on the pay stub. Cash in hand, no questions asked. The first job was hauling timber, then concrete mixing, then demolition for a hardware store being gutted for a cannabis dispensary. I didn't talk much. I didn't drink with them after hours. They called me quiet guy or tree man because I always smelled like pine. That was fine by me. Every dollar went into tools and food. Every spare hour, I trained. I treated my body like it owed me something. Woke up before sunrise. Ran the trails until my lungs screamed. Push-ups, pull-ups, deadlifts with bags of gravel. I needed to shed Micah not just mentally, but physically. That man had narrow shoulders, tired eyes, a back that hunched from trying not to take up space. Jonah stood taller, tighter, sharper in the face, hair cropped close. New lines on his jaw from days spent working and nights spent thinking. At night, I sat in the camper's tiny desk nook with a cracked monitor and a second-hand mouse that barely worked. I watched free YouTube courses until my eyes burned. UX design, Illustrator shortcuts, brand psychology, HTML, JavaScript. My fingers learned to move like tools. Design became a new kind of language, precise, subtle, powerful. I was building something. Not just logos or layouts, but a foundation. People started paying me for my freelance work. Not a lot. Small gigs at first. Coffee shops that needed a clean logo. Etsy stores looking for packaging design. One job for a local food truck got me $350 and a month of free burritos. I made a website, careful not to use my real face or name. Just clean mock-ups, good testimonials, and the tagline, simple, sharp, and unforgettable. That part wasn't just about design. That was a promise. Jonah Rourke wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. He was dependable, efficient. He be you. By the end of year 2, I had clients in 4 states and a part-time remote job with a tech startup based out of Denver. They didn't know I lived in a camper. They didn't need to. All they saw was clean code and beautiful branding. The irony wasn't lost on me. Micah was the guy they ignored at dinner parties. The plus one who didn't belong. Jonah was the name whispered in conference calls and Slack channels. Clients passed my site along like a secret they didn't want their competitors to find. I built brand kits for CEOs who would have spat out their wine if they knew the man behind the screen was once tied to a tree by people just like them. I like that. I started leaving the mountain more. Moved into a small town about 40 miles west of Portland. Rented a garage studio behind a closed bookstore. The landlord was a retired English teacher named Mrs. Lane who thought I looked like someone who read poetry. I didn't correct her. My camper stayed in Arlen's. It was like a gravestone for Micah. I visited once a month, just to sit by the river and remember who I wasn't anymore. One time, Arlen came to visit me in the new place. He walked around the space slowly, touched the desk, checked the water pressure, looked out the single window that faced the alley. Then he handed me a keychain with a steel plate that said, "Earned, not given." "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "Not yet, but close." He grinned. "Keep going, then." He didn't stay long. That was just Arlen's way. Show up. Say what mattered. Leave. By year 3, I bought a car. Nothing flashy. A Mac-grade Tacoma with a dented side panel and a Bluetooth system that only worked half the time. But it was mine. I paid cash. I stopped using aliases for payment apps. Started a business license. Rourke Creative Solutions. Everything under the table slowly moved above it. And Jonah Rourke started showing up in places I never imagined. A client in San Diego mentioned my name at a networking event. That led to a branding job for a regional tech accelerator. Then a rebrand for an old bicycle company with new investors. The checks got bigger. So did the risks. I still used a VPN. Still wore a ball cap pulled low if I had to zoom. But slowly, surely, I built a name that could walk into a room and not be ignored. I didn't have friends yet. Not real ones. But I had contacts. Regulars. People who saw value in me. That was new. That was enough for now. Sometimes I dream about the cabin. Not Arlen's. The other one. The one where they left me. I dream about waking up and still being tied to that tree. About hearing their laughter echo through the pines. Then I'd wake up in my studio, heart pounding, sweat soaked into the sheets. And I'd breathe through it. Remind myself, you're not there. You're not him. You're Jonah. Micah was the man who waited for them to come back. Jonah never needed them. One morning, I pulled into a coffee shop to grab my usual black, no sugar, no cream. There was a magazine rack near the counter. Glossy covers, bright titles, headlines about entrepreneurs and influencers. And right there front and center was a face I didn't recognize until I looked closer. It was me. Not Micah. Not exactly. But a leaner version. Shaper jaw. Subtle smirk. A navy blazer I'd worn for a brand launch. The headline read, "The Ghost Behind the Brand, Inside Jonah Rourke's Silent Empire." I stared at it for a long time. Didn't move. Didn't blink. Then I picked it up and flipped through the spread. They'd done their homework, background, speculation, quotes from anonymous clients. But no origin story. No past. Just a man who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere and built something unstoppable. They didn't know. But someone out there would. Someone who once tied me to a tree and laughed as they walked away would see this on a shelf, and their blood would go cold. That day, I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was circling back. And the silence was almost over. Momentum magazine was just the beginning. At first, I wasn't sure how they even found me. I'd kept my name clean, my face hidden. But as the business grew, so did curiosity. Maybe it was the rebranding I did for that collapsing fintech firm that suddenly doubled its valuation. Or maybe the wellness empire that quietly credited an anonymous genius for its global expansion. Word travels fast in the world of capital. But I remember the day I got the email. Subject line, feature request, Momentum magazine cover story. They wanted to call me the invisible hand behind the decade's most effective rebrands. They were fascinated by my absence from social media, my lack of public appearances, my total invisibility despite massive impact. Most people would have run, hid, declined. But not me. Not Jonah Rourke. I said yes. The interview was done over encrypted email and a single Zoom call, camera off. I provided enough polished facts to paint the picture they wanted without opening the door to the past. I talked strategy, clarity of message, the psychology of trust and digital design. They ate it up. The photos were pulled from old press kits I'd created for clients, angled just right, crisp enough to intrigue, but vague enough to remain a mystery. When the issue dropped, I bought 3 copies. One went in a drawer. One stayed on my desk. And the third? That one I mailed anonymously to Arlen, with a note, told you I'd build something. And then, the phone call started. It was subtle at first. A message request here. An email there. A number I hadn't seen in 10 years flashing across my screen like a ghost. I didn't answer. I didn't even flinch. I just stared at it and waited for the voicemail. The first voice I heard after all that time was Frances. Her tone had changed. It wasn't sharp anymore, not polished or biting. Just brittle. Micah, if you ever get this, we saw the magazine. Your photo. Please call. Your name may be different, but we know it's you. Danica, she hasn't been the same. She cried when she saw it. She didn't know. None of us knew. Please, call your family. My family? The same people who mocked my background, snickered behind their wine glasses while pretending to lift me up with charity and grace? The same family who let me rot in the woods while they poured themselves more Prosecco and said, he'll find his way back eventually? I deleted the message. A day later, it was Raymond. Smooth, rehearsed, trying to sound like the mentor he'd never been. You proved us wrong, son. You're something now. You always had potential. We were just too blind to see it. I think we all need to sit down and talk like men. I laughed out loud at that one. Like men. As if now that I'd become something useful in their world, they could welcome me back into their marble halls and silk handshakes club. I didn't respond. And then came Danica. She didn't call right away. She used email. A long, rambling letter, half apology, half confession. I don't know where to begin. Seeing your face again, on shelves, on everyone's lips, it shattered me. I've lived with guilt for 10 years, Micah. I've lived with shame. I divorced 2 years after you vanished. I couldn't keep pretending. I hated what I'd done. What we did. I can't forgive myself. But I need you to know, I never stopped wondering if you were out there. And when I saw you, I knew. You're different now. But I'd know those eyes anywhere. Please. Even if it's just once. Talk to me. I read it twice. Then closed the tab and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was cracking open with sunset. Light spilled across the rooftops like fire. And I thought, they're desperate. Not because they miss me. Not really. Because they lost their scapegoat. For years, I was the one they could point fingers at. The lost husband. The sensitive one. The mistake Danica made in her wild youth. The guy they wrote off in cocktail party whispers. But now? Now I was the man on the cover. The success they couldn't explain. The embarrassment they could no longer bury. And I knew they wouldn't stop. They needed closure. Or clarity. Or control. Something to reframe the story again, this time with them as victims of misunderstanding. And me, the prodigal husband, returning home in forgiveness and peace. But I didn't want peace. Not the kind they were offering. Instead, I watched. I pulled up their social media. Danica's once glamorous Instagram had gone quiet. The boutique she started after our marriage? Closed 2 years ago. Frances and Raymond's empire? Slipping. Board shakeups. Debt restructuring. A few quiet headlines about mismanagement and lawsuits. They were bleeding. And for the first time, they looked small. That's when the idea came. Not revenge for revenge's sake. Not loud or messy or emotional. Just a full circle moment. Something they couldn't spin. A mirror held so close they'd be forced to see the rot they'd painted over for years. I created a new alias. Julian Everly. An investor based out of Denver. Clean profile. A few articles planted online. A polished website. I contacted their family business under the guise of potential funding. They bid immediately. Frances responded to the inquiry herself, eager, humble, almost desperate. She offered a phone call. I declined, said I preferred to meet in person. I suggested a retreat-style pitch meeting. Something private. Intimate. Back to roots. I knew exactly where to suggest. The cabin. She hesitated. But only for a second. Of course. That property has always been dear to our family, she wrote back. We'd be honored to host you there. They had no idea. I sent the confirmation. Booked the rental car. Packed a single bag. One suit. One folder. One very specific photo. And a bus ticket. Not for me. For them. The cabin hadn't changed much. Still tucked into the hills like a secret no one wanted to admit existed. The gravel drive. The wind through the trees. The deck that overlooked the valley where they once left me to fade. I arrived 2 hours early. Walked the perimeter. Stood at the same tree. Ran my hand across the bark. There were still faint marks in the wood. I didn't feel rage anymore. Just silence. The kind that waits. Then their cars pulled up. Danica was the first out. Her eyes swept across me, blank at first. Then slow recognition. Her mouth dropped open. Francis came next. Then Raymond. Then Tori, Kyla, Jules, all of them, piling out like a memory being exhumed. The air turned brittle. Their faces drained color. None of them spoke. I adjusted my blazer, offered a polite smile, and said, "Shall we begin?" I didn't expect them to sleep that night. After I left the cabin, I imagined them pacing the creaky wooden floor, whispering frantic questions to one another, trying to figure out how I'd done it, where I'd gone, what I wanted, trying to convince themselves it was all some kind of sick prank in return, ironic, poetic, but forgivable if they just found the right words. Maybe they'd rehearse apologies in separate corners of the room, or lie in silence staring at the ceiling while guilt chewed through their stomachs like rats in the walls. But I slept just fine. Back in my hotel, I poured a glass of scotch and stared out at the Oregon mountains, moonlight dusting the pines like powdered sugar. I let my mind drift, back to that tree, the ropes, the cold. But it didn't sting anymore. Not the way it used to. The shame was gone. So was the need to prove myself. All that remained was clarity. By morning, I had 26 missed calls. Most of them were from unknown numbers, but I didn't need caller ID to guess. I let them sit. I didn't listen to the voicemails. Not yet. I went downstairs, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the fireplace in the lobby with the Momentum magazine folded on my lap. My own face stared back at me, polished, precise, carefully rebranded into something they never thought I could be. Not flashy. Not dramatic. Just unmistakably real. The barista brought my drink. "Hey," she said quietly, glancing at the magazine. "Are you?" I smiled, then shook my head. "He just looks like me." She nodded, unsure, then walked away. That's when the first message came through in real time. "Danica." "Micah." I don't know what to say. I'm shaking. We're all still here. We don't know what's happening. You look so different. Please, talk to me. I need to talk to you. Please. Then another. Then another. "Tori, is this some kind of performance art? Because if it is, you really messed us up." "Jules." 10 years. 10 years, man. We thought you were dead. What kind of person does this?" I didn't reply. They wanted closure, and for once, I was the one who held it. Not in a box. Not in a bottle. But in silence. It's funny how people who mocked you for being too quiet will eventually beg to hear your voice. By noon, Francis had emailed me directly. "You don't have to do this. We're willing to make a statement, publicly. Admit the truth. Tell the police it was a prank gone wrong. We'll fix it. We'll make it right. Just, please. You've made your point." Had I? Because to me, this wasn't about making a point. It was about flipping the lens. Letting them sit in the discomfort they thought I was too weak to cause. Watching them sweat, second-guess, spiral, without me lifting a finger. Micah would have replied. He would have forgiven. He would have met for coffee, listened to excuses, cried in the car afterward, still feeling like somehow it had all been his fault. But Micah was gone. I let the voicemails pile up. 50. 70. I think by the end of the day, there were over 90 missed calls. I turned off my phone and spent the evening walking through Portland's downtown. No disguise. No cap pulled low. Just me. I stopped at a bookstore, bought a journal, then sat outside on a bench as the sun dipped behind the skyline. Across the street was a billboard for a conference I'd just been invited to keynote, Disrupt West Coast, Visionaries in Branding. My name was in bold white font, Jonah Rourke, founder, Rourke Creative. A man who didn't exist 10 years ago was now standing where giants used to. My fingers brushed the edge of the phone in my pocket. I thought about calling her. Not to mend anything, just to hear how far she'd fall when she heard my voice again. To hear the crack in it. The desperation. Maybe even the regret. But I didn't. Because some victories don't need to be declared. They just need to be lived. The next morning, I received a single text that stood out. No pleading. No manipulation. Just a photo. It was of the tree. The one they'd tied me to. A weathered red ribbon had been nailed into it, fluttering in the wind. And beneath it, someone had carved a single word into the bark. Sorry. I stared at that photo for 10 straight minutes. Then I deleted it. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I wasn't even satisfied. What I felt was distance. Like I was watching a past life flicker out behind me, each message, each voice, each memory shrinking in the rearview as I drove away. And it hit me then, clearer than it ever had before. I didn't need them to feel sorry. I just needed to stop needing them at all. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop, created a new document, typed 3 words across the top. The man they tried to hide. It wasn't a revenge letter. It wasn't a call-out post or a confession. It was a manifesto. A story without names. Just a man, a tree, a silence, and what he built in the space no one thought he'd survive. The article went live on my site that night. No press blast. No announcement. Just a quiet upload. It caught fire within 48 hours. Hundreds of thousands of reads. Then millions. Shares. Threads. Podcasts. Comment sections full of people who knew, deep down, what it felt like to be abandoned, overlooked, mocked, and underestimated. They saw their own pain in mine, their own rise in my rebuild. But those who knew the real story, the real people behind it, they felt it burn. Danica sent one more voicemail. I didn't even need to play it. I could tell by the transcription on my lock screen. I'm sorry. Please. Just tell me how to make it right. That was the last message I ever got from her. I didn't block her. I didn't curse her. I just stopped listening. Because that was the final move. Not a speech. Not revenge. Not justice. Just peace. The kind of peace you earn in silence. In growth. In letting the people who hurt you scream into a void they made themselves. The kind of peace where the phone never rings again. And you're completely okay with that. They didn't know it was me. Not when I first reached out through a shell LLC using the name Julian Everly. Not when I proposed the idea of a silent investor looking to support legacy family businesses in the Pacific Northwest. And certainly not when I requested that our first meeting take place at their old cabin, a symbol, I'd written, of your company's roots and heritage. Francis loved the symbolism. Raymond called it poetic. Danica didn't respond at all. Perfect. They didn't even hesitate. That was the thing about people like them. Once they believed you were someone important, they never bothered to look too closely. They were too busy rehearsing charm, polishing their images, putting on that curated sincerity they reserved for money. I gave them a date and time. I even offered to cover the travel, the food, the logistics. They insisted they'd handle it. Still proud, still pretending to be in control. I arrived 2 hours early. The gravel road leading to Whispering Pines was narrower than I remembered. Overgrown. Cracked in places where tree roots had burst through the earth like stubborn veins. My tires crunched slow and steady as I drove up the winding path, past the forgotten signs, past the old gate that had rusted on one hinge. The forest greeted me like a witness, silent, ancient, unmoved. I parked just short of the cabin, tucked behind a thicket of evergreens. The same ones I'd stared at while tied to a tree, wrists burning, mouth dry, waiting for voices that never came. This time, I didn't wait. I stepped out into the crisp air and walked the perimeter. The cabin had been renovated a bit. New trim, a fresh coat of cedar stain, and a deck with freshly sanded steps. But beneath the paint, it was still the same place. Still held the same echoes in its bones. I made my way to the tree. It hadn't changed. The bark had thickened around the old scars, but the knots where the ropes once dug into the trunk were still there. I reached out and placed my hand on it. Closed my eyes. Not out of grief. Not even anger. Just recognition. I sat beneath it for a while, legs crossed, notebook in hand. I flipped through the pages of names, dates, clipped headlines, screenshots of voicemails, photos I'd printed and pressed into the leather-bound cover over the years. Not to dwell, but to remember, to mark. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about completion. When the wind shifted, I heard tires on gravel. I didn't move, just stood and watched from the tree line as the first car pulled up. Out stepped Raymond. Older now, grayer, shoulders slightly more hunched, but still wearing that same smug smirk he wore the night they drove away. Francis followed, hair dyed darker than memory allowed, oversized sunglasses hiding her expression. Then came Danica, her face partially turned from view, phone in hand, fingers trembling just slightly. Last came the 3 shadows, Tori, Kyla, Jules. The trio who once laughed like mean girls at a private school dance while I was duct taped to a tree as a surprise. I waited until they were all standing outside, confused by the silence. No host. No signage. Just the cabin and the woods. That's when I stepped out. I wasn't in a suit. I wore a black field jacket, Jay. Then Francis. She gasped, like she'd seen a ghost. Raymond? He didn't gasp. He narrowed his eyes, trying to reframe what he was seeing, trying to twist the image in his mind so he could control the story again. Micah, Danica whispered, her voice cracking. I stopped 10 feet from them and said nothing. Tori dropped her purse. Kyla took a step back. Jules blinked as if the sunlight had betrayed her. I let the silence stretch. 1 beat. 2. 3. Why here? I finally asked. My voice was calm. Clear. Of all the places you could have met a potential investor. Why here? No one answered. Francis stepped forward, stammering. We thought. We didn't know it was you. The name, the email, the proposal. Raymond cleared his throat. We didn't recognize you. You look different. I am, I said. And yet. I haven't forgotten a thing. Danica's eyes filled instantly. I didn't know we wouldn't come back. I thought someone else would go get you. We were drinking. It was stupid. But we didn't mean to leave you. Not for good. You tied me to a tree, I said. You gagged me. You took my phone. My wallet. You made jokes while I begged. You laughed. She shook her head, mouthing no, but the guilt was already painting her face. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small folder. I held it out. No one moved. Take it. Raymond stepped forward and took it with shaking hands. He opened it slowly. Inside was a collection of items. A printed photo of the tree, taken a week after the night they left me, bark still torn. A scan of the original missing person report, with red lines under every fabricated detail. A copy of a journal entry, dated the day I escaped the woods, written in handwriting they knew too well. And finally, a printed receipt. 1 bus ticket. $73.50. From the nearest ranger station to Portland. I didn't come back, I said softly, because I wanted to see how long it would take before you realized what you'd done. Danica broke down, hands on her knees, shaking, gasping. Tori covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Kyla just stood frozen. Jules whispered, "Oh my God," over and over again. Frances turned away, wiping her eyes. Raymond didn't move. He was staring at the ticket like it was evidence in a trial he thought he buried years ago. You didn't just leave me, I said. You erased me. You told the world I was unstable. That I left. That it was my fault. Frances turned, her voice a whisper. We didn't think you'd survive. I looked at her. I didn't. No one knew what to say after that. I let them sit in it. Let the wind rustle through the trees. Let the truth wrap around them like cold air through old bones. I walked to the porch and set down a box I'd brought. Inside were 7 envelopes, each labeled with a name. No letter was longer than 5 lines. Precise. Sharp. Unforgiving. I turned back to face them. This wasn't revenge. It was reflection. You don't get to control my story anymore. You don't get to tell people who I was. Who I am. Danica wiped her face, mascara streaking. Is there anything we can do? I smiled gently. You can remember this feeling. That'll be enough. And with that, I walked away. I didn't look back. Not when they called out. Not when I heard Jules sob. Not when Frances whispered my name like a curse. Not even when Danica dropped to her knees in the gravel. The wind followed me back through the trees. The pine needles crackled under my boots. The sun slipped behind the ridge. For the first time in 10 years, I was walking away from them on my own terms. I returned to the cabin that evening. Not because I had unfinished business. No, that part was already done. I came back because they'd asked to talk. One last time. Around the dinner table. As if some shared meal could untangle what they did. As if bread and wine could unbreak a man. But I said yes. Not to offer them closure. To deliver the truth. The table was set by the time I walked in. Candles flickered like nervous eyes. The long wooden slab in the center of the dining room looked smaller than I remembered, though it was still framed by tall windows overlooking the pines. The food was mostly untouched. Salad, rolls, some kind of roasted chicken. It smelled like a dinner party that no one had the stomach to enjoy. Danica sat at the far end. Her face was pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken when I entered. Frances and Raymond sat opposite each other, both trying to wear calm like a suit that didn't fit anymore. Tori, Kyla, and Jules sat close together near the side, silent, back straight, guilt swimming just behind their stiff expressions. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table. No one objected. No one spoke. I let the silence stretch as I placed the small black folder in front of me. The same one from earlier. I didn't open it yet. I just looked at them, one by one, letting my eyes rest on each face like a spotlight. Micah, Frances began, her voice almost too soft to hear. I just want to say, I'm not Micah, I interrupted. My tone wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. Micah Ward died in these woods. You buried him with your laughter. Danica flinched. Tori's eyes began to water. Raymond exhaled slowly and said nothing. I reached into the folder and pulled out the first sheet. It was the original police report, the one Danica filed 2 days after they left me. I read it aloud, every lie, every fabrication. He was in a strange mood. He ran off into the woods alone. We tried to stop him. I dropped it onto the table. Next came the social media post Frances wrote 3 days after I vanished. The one where she said mental health is a delicate thing and our family is devastated by this disappearance. I read it, then set it down beside the report. You made me the problem, I said, voice still even. You made my disappearance look like weakness. Like I'd broken. Not that you broke me. I didn't mean to, Danica whispered. I looked at her. Did you mean to laugh when you left me tied to a tree? She couldn't answer. Her lips trembled. Her hands gripped the edge of her chair. I screamed. I continued. For hours. The tape muffled it. My wrists bled. My legs cramped. And then, you just drove away. I thought someone would go back, she said, barely audible. You thought, I repeated. But none of you did. Kyla sobbed quietly. Jules reached for her hand under the table. I opened the folder again. This time I pulled out the picture. A printed photograph of the pine tree. Bark stripped. Rope scars visible. Next to it, another picture. Me, 10 years later, standing in front of the same tree, arms crossed, alive, unrecognizable. I passed them down the table. No one dared look away. You don't get to rewrite this, I said. You don't get to tell the story. Not anymore. Raymond cleared his throat. We were wrong. Deeply. But you've made your point. No, I said calmly. I haven't. Because I didn't come back here to hurt you. I came to show you what you tried to destroy. I opened the last item in the folder. A printout of the Momentum magazine cover. My face. The one they hadn't recognized until the moment was already too late. Then I took out a flash drive and set it in the middle of the table. That contains everything, I said. The messages, the voicemails, the apology letters, the missing persons flyers, the forensic audit that traced how long you waited before reporting it. And most importantly, the letter I wrote to myself under that tree when I thought I wouldn't survive. What are you going to do with it? Frances asked, her voice tight. Nothing, I replied. They all looked confused. You're not worth it. Raymond stiffened. Danica let out a choked breath like a dam breaking behind her ribs. You left me in the dirt, I said, and I grew something in that silence. Something bigger than your names, your reputation, your fortune. That tree you tied me to? It didn't break me. It built me. I stood slowly. You wanted to erase me. Instead, I erased you from my life, my mind, my heart. I never stopped loving you, Danica said suddenly, eyes wide, desperate. Not really. I was stupid. I was cruel. But I raised my hand to stop her. No, Danica. You love the man who didn't speak. The one who bent himself around your comfort. That man's gone. And you don't get to love the man who came out of those woods. Because you killed him before he could live. She sobbed openly now. Frances reached for her hand, but Danica pulled away. I'm not here to punish you, I continued. You'll do that to yourselves for the rest of your lives. Every time you close your eyes. Every time someone asks what happened to the man you tried to forget. I turned to Tori, Kyla, and Jules. You thought I was the joke, I said. You thought I was the one who didn't belong. But I was the only real person at that table. They couldn't meet my eyes. I picked up the flash drive, turned it over once, then slid it into my coat pocket. I won't be contacting any of you again, I said. There will be no lawsuits, no exposés, no threats. You won't hear from Joan O'Rourke. And you'll never see Micah Ward again. I walked to the door. No one followed. No one called my name. I opened it, stepped out into the cold air, and closed it behind me with the softest click. Outside, the sky was beginning to snow tiny flakes, slow and quiet, like the world was trying to soften the end of something brutal. I looked up once, then down the path, and I walked. Shoes on gravel, wind in my ears, not a single sound behind me. I left the cabin before sunrise. No note, no farewell, no warning, just 7 envelopes. I placed them quietly on the table while they slept, each one sealed in plain white, names written in black ink. I didn't need to say much. That was the point. Words had never mattered to them before. But these would cut straight through. I stood there for a moment, watching the early light creep across the wooden floor, brushing the edges of the walls with cold gold. The same room where they'd once laughed, glasses raised, planning a birthday prank they thought was harmless. And now, just silence. A thick, suffocating kind. The kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness. The kind that lives in bones. I turned toward the door, my hand lingering on the handle just long enough to listen. No footsteps, no whispers, no one rushing to stop me. They were still asleep. Of course they were. They always woke up late. As I stepped outside, the gravel cracked beneath my boots, sharp and final. The air was cold enough to bite, but it didn't bother me. I was used to colder things, like memories. Like silence. Like the chill that lives in your chest when people who say they love you leave you tied to a tree and call it a joke. I didn't bring anything with me except a leather satchel. Inside were my car keys, a worn photo of Arlen's cabin, and the last note I'd written to myself. I didn't plan to look back, but I did. One last glance over my shoulder. Not for them. Not even for the cabin. For the ghost of the man who'd once been left here. Micah. He'd waited for them to return. Believed they would. Even forgave them, in some deep corner of his heart, before his body had given out from exhaustion. That man had died beneath the pine trees. I nodded once, to no one. A kind of farewell. Not sentimental. Just necessary. Then I walked down the slope, toward the car I'd parked just out of sight behind the ridge. The sun was rising, golden light cutting across the landscape like a blade. I drove slow through the mountain roads, not because I was hesitant, but because I didn't need to rush anymore. There was no chase. No race. Only freedom. 2 hours later, I stopped at a gas station on the edge of town. I topped off the tank, grabbed a black coffee, and sat on the hood of the truck with the sun warming my back. A young man walked past me on his way to the store. He paused and glanced down at the copy of Momentum magazine still lying on my passenger seat. "You look like this guy," he said. I smiled. "That's what people keep telling me." He laughed and kept walking. That was the difference now. I didn't flinch. I didn't hide. I didn't worry about what people saw, because they couldn't touch me. That evening, I reached my apartment in Seattle. Sleek, quiet, modern. It wasn't flashy, but every corner of it was mine. Every brick, every tile, every light switch paid for with the work of my own hands. No one could take it from me. I walked into the kitchen, set down my keys, and glanced at the folded letter I kept taped to the fridge. Arlen's handwriting. Faded but firm. Peace isn't found in silence. It's found in what you do when the silence comes. I poured a drink, sat by the window, and opened my laptop. The file with their letters was still there, copies of what I'd left behind. I opened the first, labeled Danica, and read it again. "You never asked what I needed. Only what made you look good. You wanted a quiet husband, not a partner. You got both, and threw him away. You didn't just lose me. You lost the version of yourself who was worth forgiving." The next was for Raymond. "You called me weak. Fragile. Said I didn't have what it took. What you didn't know is that strength isn't measured by volume, but by how long someone can stay silent while they're being destroyed. I stayed longer than I should have. That was my mistake. But walking away, that was yours. Francis, you never liked me. That's fine. But don't pretend you didn't see what they were doing. You were the audience. And you clapped. Every single time. You once told me I'd never be one of you. You were right. I became something better. Tori, I hope your voice shakes when you tell people what you did. I hope the punchline doesn't land. I hope someone finally asks, 'Wait, why did you think that was funny?' Kyla, you followed. You watched. You laughed. But I hope one day someone you love is left behind. And I hope you remember what it felt like to stand by and say nothing. Jules, drunk or not, your cruelty was deliberate. You wanted me to be humiliated. You succeeded. But you also woke up the part of me that doesn't ever forget. The last letter was addressed to all of you. I rebuilt myself not to show you what I could be, but to remind myself of what I never deserved. You thought the woods would break me. Instead, they sharpened me. I survived because I became someone else. And now, I live without you. And you will never escape the shadow of what you did." I closed the laptop, took a breath. The sun was setting over the Seattle skyline, washing the buildings in orange and pink. Cars buzzed below. Life moved on. My life moved forward. No more backward glances. No more digging through the rubble of who I used to be. I was a man who survived something unthinkable, and I didn't just crawl back. I walked out. Tall, quiet, whole. The phone vibrated once. I glanced at it. One new voicemail. Danica again. I didn't listen. I moved to the bookshelf, slid the flash drive into a case, and placed it in a drawer beside my father's old watch and a photo of Arlen from the mountain. He'd passed last winter quietly in his sleep, like the kind of man who didn't need a final word. He'd said everything he needed already, including what he said to me the day I left his cabin. You'll know you're healed the day you don't need to be heard. And he was right. I didn't need them to understand, or apologize, or change. I just needed to walk away. And now, I finally had. I named the article The Man They Tried to Hide. Not for shock value. Not even for closure. I wrote it because it was time. Time to tell the story my way. No names. No cities. No scandal. Just truth wrapped in metaphor, layered in restraint, and told like a whisper that would linger long after the last line. It wasn't a tell-all. It wasn't about pointing fingers or airing out wounds for likes. It was about the echo, the life that existed between silence and survival. I poured everything into it. The loneliness. The fury. The transformation. The decade spent crafting a man from the ashes of one who was discarded like a bad joke. I didn't name Danica, or Francis, or Raymond. I didn't need to, because the ones who knew would know, and the ones who didn't, they'd find themselves in the story anyway, because everyone's been underestimated. Everyone's been left behind by people who were supposed to love them. Everyone, at some point, has had to crawl out of their own version of the woods. I published it at midnight. No press release. No announcement. Just one quiet post on the homepage of Rourke Creative, under a small heading that simply said, "A personal reflection." I closed the laptop and went to bed. By morning, it had already gone viral. Not in the sensational, messy way that most things do. This wasn't rage bait. It was slow, emotional, heavy. People shared it in whispers. They passed it to friends who were healing, posted it with captions like, "Read this if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing." Within a week, my inbox overflowed. Thousands of messages. Some from strangers who wept between lines, telling me how the story made them feel seen. Others from therapists who asked if they could share it with patients. A woman from Brazil said she'd translated the entire piece and printed it to read with her book club. And then, the other kind of messages. From those who knew the real story. One of Danica's old friends sent an anonymous email. "I always suspected something was off. You didn't deserve what they did. Just know, everyone knows now." Another came from someone inside Raymond's company. "Your article didn't just shake the family. It made the board ask hard questions. They're not surviving this quietly." I never replied. Because it was never about revenge. It was about owning the story, finally. About removing their grip from the chapters they never earned the right to write. That night, I sat at my desk, the lights low, and looked at the framed photo beside my screen. It was of Nia, my wife. She had that half-smile on her face, the one that crinkled her eyes and made me forget how much pain had once lived inside me. We met 2 years after I moved to Seattle. She was a graphic novelist, sharp with words and softer with people. I designed her cover art for free after seeing a flyer at a bookstore. She tried to pay me in coffee. I told her I'd take a conversation instead. That turned into a walk. A walk turned into dinner. Dinner into years. And one quiet morning, in the middle of a quiet kitchen, with our toddler drawing stars in crayon on the wall, she looked at me and said, "I don't care who you used to be. You built a man I'd follow anywhere." She didn't just fall in love with Jonah Rourke. She helped finish building him. Her name was never on the flash drives, never scribbled in the journals. But she was the first person I handed it all to, and she didn't flinch. She read the letters. She saw the photos. She listened to the old voicemails, and then she put her hand on my chest and whispered, "You never had to go back to the cabin. You already won the moment. You didn't need their apology. We have a daughter now. Her name is Marin. She's 4 years old and already braver than I ever was at 30. She builds towers out of blocks and says, 'Watch what I can do, Daddy.' And every time I say, 'I see you, baby,' go even higher. Because no one ever said that to me. And the cycle ends with me. Not with bitterness. Not with revenge. But with awareness. I take her to preschool in the mornings and pick her up in the evenings. On Thursdays, we bake banana muffins, and she always forgets the sugar. Nia lets her wear capes to bed. I tuck her. You were never broken. Just buried. It reminds me that Micah Ward wasn't weak. He was just waiting to be unearthed. Sometimes I wonder if Danica ever drives past the cabin again. If she tells people she knew me before. If she regrets the tree, the tape, the silence. If she ever thinks about what kind of legacy we could have had if she'd chosen partnership over performance. But I don't wonder for long, because I don't live there anymore. I live in the now. In a high-rise apartment where Marin's art fills the fridge and Nia's laughter fills the hallways. I live in morning walks, in design calls, in moments where my name isn't a secret and my past isn't a wound. I live in peace, the kind that doesn't need validation, the kind that isn't loud. It's quiet, firm, still. It's the sound of a man who was left behind and then decided to leave everything else behind, too. That's legacy, not what they say when you're gone, but what you choose to build while you're still here. And I'm still here, more than ever.